We are now on our third and probably arguably one of the more important macromolecules, proteins. Proteins is Chan. So if you remember from our Amoeba Sisters video, we talked about Chan Chomp. Chan, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Again, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, these are the elements that make up your proteins. The monomer of a protein is called the amino acid. Underneath the picture right there, what you're seeing is a picture of an amino acid. And I want to point something out to you. We have these carbon in the center, right? You have then this R group to the side. You have the amino group and you have the carboxyl group, okay? The most important thing for you guys to remember when looking at this structure for an amino acid is the R group. So if you see some molecule with carbon at the center and a little R group on the side, you know that that has to be an amino acid. What makes the amino acids unique from each other are the R group. Now, these are the most abundant organic molecules in living system. They are also the proteins are also the most diverse when it comes to structure and when it comes to function. So, if we say that, carbohydrates are used for energy, but they're sometimes used for structure, we say that lipids are used for energy storage, but we can also use them for cell membranes and waterproofing. Like pretty much every chemical reaction that happens in your body happens because of a protein. Oh, and of course, the polymer, which I kind of skipped over that part. The polymer of proteins are polypeptides. So again, monomers, amino acids, get together and make polypeptides, the polymer, and then those polypeptides will fold and get together, and then those polypeptides together will make the actual protein. Okay. Next slide. So this next slide that we're coming up on should be number 16 in your note catchers. Okay, Chan. Again, proteins carry out many, 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 many diverse functions. Top of these is that it forms cell structures. Like the actual things inside your cells are proteins. Side note, your hemoglobin, your red blood cell, which is its own type of cell, is mostly made of protein. Transport proteins will help move things around the body. Enzymes, remember I said like every single chemical reaction in your body takes place because of proteins? Enzymes are required for like every single chemical reaction that takes place inside your body. Enzymes are proteins. Enzymes control the rate of reactions in all living things. So enzymes are proteins, proteins are enzymes, depending on how you want to look at it. But they control chemical reactions inside your body and inside the body of every living thing. Proteins also are hormones, which can control the activity of body systems. So like your growth hormones, that tell you when to start a growth spurt, when to stop the growth spurt, the fact that your fingernails or your hair are growing. All of these things are controlled by hormones, which of course are proteins. Proteins also really, really good in defending your body against pathogens and disease. So, in the United States, in American culture, when you get sick with cold or flu, the traditional thing to feed somebody is chicken noodle soup. I am Dominican. When we get sick, the traditional thing that we feed our children is more of it's still like a chicken soup, but it's more of a curry. Every single country has the thing that they feed sick people. Why am I bringing this up? Because even before we knew that proteins were made for helping to fight against pathogens and help bolster your immune system. Like our forefathers figured this out, our foremothers figured this out because they figured, hey, when I feed this person protein, they seem to get better faster. The reason for that is because that protein is going to help sort of build up your immune system. So it's really important to get your protein in when you're not feeling well. Sometimes it's not great. Sometimes you might have an upset stomach, which is why we tend to feed sick people, more bland food like your chicken noodle soups. Um, but it does help fight off your disease. So there's that. Whenever you move, contracting muscles and then releasing that contraction. So every muscle works by contraction and then release, contraction, release. All that happens because of proteins. And again, proteins also can help to store nutrients. I always say that it's really, really important, especially in eggs and seedlings, because when you have an egg, whether it's an ostrich egg or a chicken egg or a goose egg, um, that egg, once it leaves the mom's body and she lays the egg, that egg has to contain all of the nutrients for that individual organism, whether it's a baby ostrich or a gosling or a chick, to be able to grow and develop and then eventually hatch. Same thing for seeds. When trees or plants drop seeds, that inside that seed casing, you have to have all of the nutrition to sort of sprout that seed. And again, eggs and seeds are mostly protein. So that's why, if you go on a diet, or if they're like, oh, you want to increase your protein, but maybe you're not a huge fan of meat, that's why they always say nuts and eggs. A lot of protein there. Slide 17. Amino acids use covalent bonds. Let's remember that the covalent bonds are the bonds where we are sharing electrons, okay? So ionic bonds, we're giving and taking electrons. Covalent bonds, we are sharing electrons between atoms. And then our hydrogen bonds are just kind of a weak acid that happens between polar molecules. But amino acids use covalent bonds to link together to form a polypeptide. So again, amino acids are the monomer. The polypeptide is the polymer of a protein. And again, a protein is built from one or more polypeptides. Now, there are about 20 amino acids that are naturally found in the world. Every single one of them have the amino group, that's the nitrogen side, the carboxyl group, that's the oxygen and OH side, and also the R group. Now, the R group is what makes each amino acid slightly different. And again, if I show you a picture of a molecule and I say, is this an amino acid? Is this a carbohydrate? Like, what is this? How you know it's an amino acid, how you know that it is going to be the building block of a protein, look for the R group. Just like if you were looking at a carbohydrate, you're going to look for that ring structure. If you're looking at a lipid, you're going to look for something that has kind of like a head with like little tails on it. That's how you know it's a lipid. How you know it is a protein or an amino acid. Look for that R group. Again, different R groups give the amino acids different properties. Because obviously we talked that these proteins like kind of do everything. So those R groups determine what function your protein is going to have. So there's 4 different levels of organization when it comes to protein: primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. Primary is just a sequence of amino acids. Secondary, we see folding of your polypeptide chain. Tertiary, these are 3D arrangements of a polypeptide chain. This is where we actually get into a true protein. And then quaternary, these are very complex proteins involving 2 or more proteins. Enzymes tend to be kind of complicated. Issues or questions? All right, a quick little video on proteins. Give me 1 second. I don't think I shared my audio. I got to reshare my screen, including my sound, so you can actually hear my video. I'm sorry, I just want to back up just a little bit. So earlier we had talked about the structure of the amino acid. Again, we have the amino group with the nitrogen. We have the carboxyl group, which is the carbon side. And then we have this R group. But again, amino group, carboxyl group, that's great. How you identify an amino acid, you will always look for the R group. All right. Woo, protein. Exciting stuff. All right. Let me get back to the notes. All right. Our last of the macromolecules. So far we have seen carbohydrates. Monomer is a monosaccharide. Main function is the fact that it is quick energy. Then we looked at lipids, monomer being the fatty acid and glycerol. Main function of lipids is that they store energy. We took a quick look at proteins. We said that proteins had a monomer called an amino acid, and that proteins pretty much did all the chemical structures. Sorry, a lot of cell structures along with the chemical reactions in the body. And now our fourth most important macromolecule is our nucleic acids. Nucleic acid probably sounds familiar because you've heard of deoxyribose nucleic acid or DNA. Nucleic acid is what that Na stands for in DNA. It is a nucleic acid. When we watched our Amoeba Sister video a million years ago, we talked about the cho-cho-chan chomp. So this chomp is the nucleic acid. Okay, so it has the carbon, the hydrogen, and oxygen, just like every other macromolecule. It has nitrogen, just like the protein, and we're also going to see the phosphorus here. Okay. Now, the monomer of a nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. And that's actually kind of the only one that kind of sounds like what it is. So that's kind of cool. And we can see the structure of the nucleotide over here. We have this phosphate group. That's where the phosphorus comes in. You have a 5 carbon sugar. And you know it's a 5 carbon sugar because it is a pentagon. So five, this shape is a 5-sided shape, which means there's 5 sugars. Each corner represents a carbon. And then off to the side, you have this nitrogenous base. So, as far as the structure of the monomer, what you're always going to look for is this sort of circly thing connected to the pentagon, connected to something else. So, it's going to be a 3-part structure. The polymer, if that's the monomer, this nucleotide is the monomer. The polymer is called the nucleic acid. Now, the main function of your nucleic acids is to transmit and store hereditary or genetic information. This is your DNA and this is your RNA. Now, there is another form of a nucleotide or a nucleic acid called ATP, and it is all about it is for cellular energy. But as far as we are concerned in this class, because this is not an AP class and we don't really care that much about ATP and regular biology, our main focus when we look at nucleic acid, the main function of DNA and RNA, of course, or of all of our nucleic acid, is to store and transmit genetic information. When I say store and transmit genetic information, please understand what I mean is this stores the blueprint for making you. This stores the blueprint for making a tree or a goose. This is the blueprint that with every single instruction that every single part of your body would ever need to make everything that you need as you grow and develop through life. And yes, literally half of your DNA came from your mom, and the other half of your DNA came from your dad, because as humans, we do reproduce sexually, which means that we get a mix of DNA into the offspring's DNA. All right, we are now on slide number 19. Nucleic acids made up of DNA and RNA are made up of 3 parts: the monosaccharide, a single sugar, right? We talked about that in the nucleotide. DNA, the name of that sugar is deoxyribose. Again, look at that ose. You know it's a sugar because it ends in ose. It has to be a sugar. DNA is deoxyribose. RNA is just regular old ribose. There is the phosphate group. Okay. And then there is a nitrogenous base. Now, DNA is nitrogenous base. RNA, they have 3 in common. They both have cytosine, they both have guanine, and they both have adenine. The difference between DNA and RNA comes in that 4th nitrogenous base. For DNA, it is thymine, and for RNA, it is uracil. So, differences between DNA and RNA. DNA, we can obviously see here in the picture, has 2 sides. RNA is a single polymer. The sugar are different. DNA is deoxyribose, RNA is ribose. And the third main difference between DNA and RNA is that DNA has thymine as one of its nitrogenous bases, and RNA has uracil as one of its nitrogenous bases. Now, I do want to say this as far as these nitrogenous bases, that's a whole lot to spell and write. Very rarely do scientists actually write out the words cytosine, guanine, adenine, thymine, or uracil. Oftentimes, as long as we know you're talking about DNA or RNA, they'll just put the capital letter of so cytosine becomes the letter C, guanine becomes the letter G, adenine becomes the letter A, thymine capital T, uracil capital U. And that just makes our life a little bit easier. And that's what we see up here in the graphic. Next to cytosine is a C, guanine, G, etc. All right, so that pretty much covers our macromolecules. And just as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, every single living thing, you, me, chickens, eagles, trees, grass, mushrooms, fish under the sea, sharks, it doesn't matter. every living thing is made up of these four macromolecules. Because without these four macromolecules, so many of the functions of life, the eight functions of life that we already talked about earlier this year, don't work. One of the functions of every living thing that we talked about earlier in the year was that every single living thing has a universal genetic code. Well, there's your nucleic acid. One of the things that we talked about earlier this week is that earlier in the year is that every living thing must have energy from the outside world. Well, then there's your carbs, right? So like every function that we talked about, and those eight main functions of every living thing, tie somehow back to these macromolecules. All right, so quick video on nucleic acids.
Nucleic acids are a class of biomolecules that are found in all living organisms and are responsible for the storage of genetic information. They're also responsible for protein synthesis. Nucleic acids are made up of monomers called nucleotides. Nucleotides are made up of three components: a 5-carbon sugar, such as ribose, a phosphate functional group, and a nitrogenous base. The 5-carbon sugar present in DNA is deoxyribose, and the four nitrogenous bases are adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Nucleotides are linked together by dehydration synthesis, or polymerization reactions, between the sugar of one nucleotide and the phosphate group of a second nucleotide. In the process, a sugar-phosphate backbone is formed, linking the nucleotides together. Notice how the nitrogenous bases project to one side of the backbone. DNA is composed of two strands arranged as a right-handed helix. The strands are also antiparallel, meaning that they are oriented in opposite directions. The two strands are held together by hydrogen bonds. Guanine forms hydrogen bonds with cytosine, and adenine bonds with thymine. This complementary base pairing links the strands together. It also plays an important role in the replication of the DNA molecule. Phosphatidyl, and it contains the sugar ribose instead of deoxyribose, and the nitrogenous base uracil instead of thymine. Also, RNA is usually single-stranded, but is not in the helix. Because of this, it is less stable than DNA and is usually more temporary. While DNA stores the information that is needed to construct a protein, RNA functions in regulating the expression of this information in the protein synthesis process. Not all nucleic acids are involved in information processing in the cell. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is a modified nucleotide that plays a central role in energy processing within cells. ATP is composed of the nitrogenous base adenine bound to the sugar ribose, just like in RNA. However, 3 phosphate groups can be added to the molecule. The bonds between the phosphate groups are high-energy bonds. These molecules serve as temporary energy batteries for the cell. When energy is needed, the terminal phosphate group is removed, releasing energy and forming adenosine diphosphate, which may then be recharged by the energy pathways of the cell.
All righty, yay!